Jack Broughton is often referred to as the father of English boxing. He was tutored by a man named James Figg. Now, while fighting an opponent, I think on Oxford Street, the fight took place. I believe it was. That's where I read it was one time. He killed his opponent, who died days later from subsequent injuries after their bout. In honor of his fallen opponent, Broughton started to craft Broughton's rules, which were used till 1838, when the London prize ring rules were developed. Now, I probably have to do a little more research to find out when Broughton was a champion. We're going to do more Queensberry rules, British Championship, Heavyweight Championship boxing. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the history of that more than anything, because I don't want to be telling you facts that I can't substantiate right now. So, now obviously, under Broughton's rules, you had champions like Tom Cribb, who a lot of people will be familiar with through his bouts with Tom Molyneux and Bill Richmond. Richmond was actually the manager of Tom Molyneux. Two black heavyweights, Bill Richmond and Tom Molyneux. Tom Molyneux lost to Cribb in controversial circumstances. Bill Richmond, a very small heavyweight, boxed circles around Tom Cribb, but Cribb eventually caught up with him and dealt with him. Now I'm just reading this, and this is very interesting. Tom Cribb's first fight was in Wood Green. Wow. Damn. I'm going to be doing a lot of learning as I go along here. Some stuff I know off the top of the noggin, and some I don't. So obviously you got champions like that. I don't know the full history of the Broughton ruled champions. I don't know when Broughton reigned. I know Tom Cribb for the two fights against the two African Americans. So, I'm not going to pretend, Beats knows everything and try and tell you about fights I never saw in detail, which you never saw. Okay, not going to do that. So you get the second phase, obviously, and that's London prize fighting rules, which started in 1838, I believe. 1838, the beginning of London prize fighting rules. 1853, in came the Queensberry rules. Jem Mace was at least one of the English champions under the London prize fighting rules. Jem Mace, a very popular boxer of his time. Queensberry rules came in 1853. There was also something called the American Fair Play rules, which was mainly for amateur boxing. I don't know the history of that and the dates of that either. And box records tracing back the British title from Jewy Smith took what could have been the vacant title from Iron Hague in 20 rounds in 1910. 21st of February 1910. And the rematch 10 months later, Iron Hague took the title back from Jewy Smith on points over 20 rounds. The title lay dormant for some reason for nearly 3 years, and that's where Bombardier Billy Wells came in. Billy Wells could punch very hard. He was a very good puncher, but the chin just wasn't up to scratch. Every major fight he had, he got knocked out. Gunboat Smith, George Carpentier took him out. Good British champion, just couldn't take a good shot on the jaw. He started the trend of the horizontal British heavyweight. Bombardier Billy Wells. Nevertheless, he held the title for a goddamn long time, For over 3 years he held the title. For over 3 years. And he defended it numerous times. Mostly by KO. Billy was a big guy, 6'3", very strong physique, good fighter, good puncher, just couldn't take a good shot. And that stopped him from progressing any further in the game. Joe Beckett takes the title from Bombardier Billy Wells, doesn't defend it, and Frank Goddard beats Jack Curfey for what I assume is the vacant title. Joe Beckett comes back, regains his title from Frank Goddard via a second round knockout, defends it numerous times, takes out Billy Wells again, and once again he doesn't lose to Goddard, but Goddard's got the title again. In 1923, Goddard takes on Jack Bloomfield and wins by disqualification in 2. Phil Scott, he takes the championship of Frank Goddard. I've heard of Phil Scott. I've heard that name. He makes 1 defense, and then Reggie Mean takes over. Jack Peterson was a very popular champion. He took the title from Reggie Mean, second round knockout. He lost to Len Harvey, another popular British champion. They went back and forth at it. Harvey took the title from Peterson. Peterson took it back from Harvey, 12th round KO. I have seen that fight actually via Pathé News. Peterson went on to beat Len Harvey again. Harvey, then Ben Ford came and interrupted the reign of Peterson. I'm just going to box rec Ben Ford fully. He might be a South African. Let's do a little research into his background. Ben Ford. F-O-O-R-D. Yes. South African. Born in South Africa. Probably had relatives born in Britain, who lived in Britain, which qualified him. Commonwealth ties and all that. But let's get back to this. Ben Ford lost to Tommy Farr via 15-round decision on the 15th of March 1937. Tommy Farr comes from Wales, which is in Britain, not England. Tommy Farr actually took Joe Louis 15 rounds for the heavyweight championship. And he also beat the likes of Max Baer, and Max Baer beat him too. Why am I only seeing 1 title fight for Tommy Farr? Am I being led to believe he only had the British title for 1 fight? Wow. Let's box rec Tommy Farr's record, man. Let's do that. Let's do that. Well, you see, that will do it. He was having a lot of international contests. That's why we don't see more British title fights from Tommy Farr, who I imagine would have beat most of the guys who were around at the time. Jack Peterson, Len Harvey, and them guys. He would have defeated all of them. You see, because he even beats Walter Nasel. Now, alright, before we go to Walter Nasel, Tommy Farr was doing it big on the international circuit. He beat Max Baer in the Haringey Arena, which was just down the road from where I live again. Every time I walk past the B&Q, which is there now, I always think of the arena being there, you know, because it hosted a lot of famous boxers and a lot of big boxing events, amongst other things. He also beat Ben Ford there. Tommy wasn't a huge puncher, but he was a great boxer. Good mobility, good jab, very good ring IQ. Tommy went on to fight Joe Louis. I told you he beat Max Baer and lost to Max Baer. He lost to Jim Braddock in America. Lost a unanimous decision to Max Baer in America. He lost to guys like Lou Nova, who were all title contenders who fought Joe Louis at some time. The Lou Nova fight seems to have been a punishing battle according to BoxRec. He lost to Red Berman in America, Madison Square Garden, but won the return in Haringey Arena. He also knocked out Larry Gaines, a Canadian heavyweight, a black Canadian heavyweight who was very good, a skilled heavyweight. Tommy lost to guys like Lloyd Marshall, Black Murderers Row fighter in 1950. And his last bout was a TKO loss to Don Cockle. Don Cockle, former British champion, His name should come up as I read out the BoxRec stats a little later. Former British champion. Good light heavyweight. Actually lost to Randolph Turpin by KO. Randolph Turpin destructed him, man. And he was a middleweight. Randolph Turpin. Don Cocker was a full-fledged light heavyweight, but Randolph Turpin made light work of it. He was a good fighter, Randolph Turpin. It wasn't just a fluke result against Robinson that makes his legend. He was an absolute diamond of a fighter. Let's just say that. Walter Nasal. There we go. Here we go. Let's click in there. Now, we can see how good Tommy Farr is in terms of British competition. Walter Nasal was the scourge of British heavyweights, knocking out Reggie Mean, former British champion, outpointing George Cook in Kensington, Royal Albert Hall, has a draw with Don McCorkindale over 12, which he probably won, but you know. He then loses to Don McCorkindale by disqualification. Low blow. See, boxing was a different sport these days. I mean, just look at Walter's schedule. You know, he's fighting in England, Germany, France, New York, Brooklyn. Fighters just don't do that today. And it's a romantic era of boxing. And you have to understand when old people get sentimental about old school boxing. It's just a totally different event to what we're witnessing today in boxing. Just a totally different event, you know. He's fighting guys like Tommy Lauren in Madison Square Garden. Tommy Lauren was a former light heavyweight champion, you know. Good fighter, very, very good fighter, durable, skilled fighter, very, very good fighter. Walter was fighting guys like that and traveling all over the place. But let's get back to Walter's record and let me tell you why he was the scourge of British heavyweights. Walter lost by KO to Max Schmeling. He draws with Len Harvey in Wembley, former British champion. Once again, he probably won the fight. Then he TKOs Jack Peterson, who was the British champion at the time, I believe. Then in the rematch at Wembley, he does the same thing again. Beats Ben Ford in the Haringey Arena. In between that, he loses to Primo Carnera in 4 rounds in America. He beats Ben Ford at the Haringey Arena, knocks out Jack Peterson again, loses to Tommy Farr by KO. You know, good result. Clean KO by Tommy Farr, for those who say he can't punch. Beats Ben Ford again, but this time he's fighting in Germany. He's fighting at home for once. But it's the Jack Peterson fights which ruined British hopes of seeing Jack Peterson going on for further honours. And Walter spilt him all over the place. But as you can hear, Tommy Farr is the only British heavyweight who conclusively defeated Walter Nasal. We move on. Len Harvey. He took the mantle from Tommy Farr while Tommy Farr was fighting abroad. Len Harvey, he defeats Eddie Phillips via disqualification in 4. Jack London, he takes it up from Len Harvey, who probably retires after that, perhaps. Harvey, like a lot of fighters back then, fought between light heavyweight and heavyweight. His career was ended by who at the time would have been the future light heavyweight champion of the world, Freddie Mills, who stopped him. Freddie himself used to fluctuate between heavyweight and light heavyweight too. That was a regular occurrence back then. And there was no cruiserweight division, obviously. There was probably, and in all truth, there wasn't much need for a cruiserweight division because, let's face it, the heavyweights were a lot lighter on average than they are today. Often fighters like Freddie Mills or Len Harvey would probably run out of opponents at light heavyweight or maybe even at heavyweight, and they'd have to come down to wherever the payday was. And that's how they did it back then. But we move on, I digress. Jack London, he defeats Freddie Mills. Freddie Mills is a former world light heavyweight champion from the UK. Freddie, one of the more popular British fighters, had a very colourful story, exciting fighter. I've done a video about his boxing schedule to the modern day boxing schedule maybe a couple of years back. He lost to Gus Lesnovich for the light heavyweight title, did Freddie, by KO, brutal KO. You know, he was flawed early. He came back into it and looked like he was going to maybe take over. But Lesnovich rescued the fight and TKO'd him in 10. In his next fight, within weeks, they throw him in there with a British champion, Bruce Woodcock, who we'll talk about later. You know, you just wouldn't get scheduling like that now. You just wouldn't. And then after that, you know, within months, he's fighting Joe Baxey, who was a good American heavyweight contender. And boxing was very perilous them days when they ignored the more probable evidence that taking punches to the head correlated to brain damage. It was a dangerous sport. It was a dangerous sport. Very dangerous, you know. And yes, I've seen the documentaries where Freddie was getting tremendous headaches, you know, and suffering through his trade. But no one was saying, oh, it's because he's taking punches. It was just, oh, yeah, Freddie's suffering from headaches. It's crazy, you know. Bruce Woodcock in White Hart Lane, Tottenham, just up the road from me, in my hood. You know what I mean? He KOs Jack London for the title. The fight actually takes place in my team stadium, in Tottenham's stadium, in White Hart Lane. I love reading shit like that, man. It's good shit. It's good shit. Good shit. And then after, obviously, Bruce Woodcock takes on Freddie Mills. He KOs Freddie in 14 rounds. Bruce Woodcock, before I box wreck it, because, you know, I don't like to just do wooden box wreck shit, you know, because it just sounds too formulated. He was a big puncher, but once again, I'm going to read out his box wreck stats. Check out his box wreck stats. I'm going to get to them now. Right. Look at this record. 35 wins, 31 KOs. That's a great percentage. 5 losses, and 4 of them losses came by KO. You know, he loses to guys like Joe Baxey, who I mentioned already was a decent American heavyweight. He loses to Tammy Murriello, who fought Joe Louis, as far as I remember, and got stopped. Tough fighter. Succumbs his Commonwealth and British titles to Jack Gardner. And we're gonna get back to the British Championship in a minute. But he loses to Lee Saffold from America. Now, I want to tell you a little story about Lee Saffold. I want to tell you a little story. And it's a cautionary tale about things to come. So, Joe Louis retires after KOing Jersey Joe Walcott in 11 rounds. Joe wisely retires because in the first fight with Jersey Joe Walcott, I actually saw the fight. Walcott won the fight by the proverbial country mile. Jersey Joe Walcott looked like he was boxing in a different time zone, but they gave Louis the decision. So now, the great brown bomber, Joe Louis, in the rematch, however, he takes a count. He gets knocked down, flash knockdown, in round 3. Walcott is putting a beating on Joe, but Walcott gets very cocky. He gets very cocky, and that fancy footwork he does, he was trying to humiliate Joe a little, doing a few shuffles and this and that, and then Joe caught him with this combination, man, like, you know. And Joe's short range combination punching is so underrated. That's why when everybody in our debate was just writing off Joe Louis against Sonny Liston would have probably beat him peak to peak. But man, listen, I don't care how tough Liston is. You get caught by one of Joe's short combinations, he'll take you out. And he retained the title and retired promptly. That was in 1948. That allowed Ezra Charles to take the vacant National Boxing Association title from Jersey Joe Walcott. Right? Ezra Charles, a master boxer. He takes the title from Jersey Joe Walcott. But, even though he's the NBA champion, he's not recognized as the full world champion. In a lot of places in America, he's not recognized as the full world champion. In a lot of Europe, he's not recognized as the full heavyweight champion. But nevertheless, Ezra strives with his career defending numerous times. And eventually Joe Louis comes out of retirement in 1950. And Ezzard outpoints him. And then he's universally recognized as the heavyweight champion. You know? But when Joe Louis vacates the belt, Lee Savold, who was a tough contender, but no more than that. A very tough contender, actually, but no more than that. Right? Due to his parentage, his ancestry, which is Norwegian, he qualifies to fight for the European title. He was later knocked out by Joe Louis, right? But nevertheless, he fights Bruce Woodcock for the European title, or the EBU version of the World Heavyweight title, the European Boxing Union. And he wins by 4th round stoppage. So by stopping Bruce Woodcock, the British champion, he's recognised at least by the EBU and the British Boxing Board of Control. Hold your hands up in shame. They recognised Lee Savold as their heavyweight champion. That was in 1950. Obviously, the British Board of Control only went along with this to try and get a British world champion in Bruce Woodcock. But they failed. You know? But, you know, to me, that's the British Boxing Board of Control's moment of shame. That's one of them. That's definitely one of them. When Joe Louis knocks out Lee Savold, they obviously withdraw from recognising him as a world champion. The British Boxing Board of Control withdraw their recognition. You know what I mean? So, you know, that was one of the first times we had multiple belts in the heavyweight division, but no one really recognised Lee Savold as a champion, no more than a paper champion. But we move on. Johnny Williams, he wins the title from Jack Gardner in 1952. Don Cockle, he takes the title from Johnny Williams in 1953. Don Cockle, with his man breasts and everything, you know, he fought Rocky Marciano. Audacious title attempt. Shouldn't have really got a title shot, in all honesty. Shouldn't have really, but he does. And Rocky beats the crap out of this guy, you know. Fouls him, just roughs him up and beats him up. But Cockle, you know, he took his lumps well. Took his lumps. Now, I'm going to have to keep it real. I'm not quite sure if Cockle retired or not. I'm going to assume he retired. He got beaten badly by Nino Valdez in his next fight after Rocky Marciano. Nino Valdez, a big Cuban who was in very good form at the time, and it said that Rocky ducked him. But I'm going to assume that Cockle retired shortly after the Valdez and his next fight, which was a losing fight. No British title on the line. So Don Cockle's last British title fight was in 1953, a 15-round points decision over Johnny Williams. The British title has gone on ice, however, for about 3 years. And then we have Joe Erskine, a Welshman, who takes on Johnny Williams in 1956 and outpoints him. Skillful Welsh boxer Joe Erskine. He goes on to defend against Sir Henry Cooper, long-time British heavyweight champion, one of the most popular sportsmen in the UK. And he outpoints Henry over 15. He outpoints him. He loses to Brian London, a rough, tough British fighter who lost to Muhammad Ali. Brian London KOs Joe Erskine in 8. And he loses his title to Henry Cooper. 15-round decision. Henry wins the title. Now Henry, long-term British champion, gets his revenge against Joe Erskine, the rematch. Erskine challenges for Henry's title. TKOs him in 12. And I think it's the third. He fights him 3 times on the trot, actually. You know, 3 times on the trot. And I think it's the third one of them KOs in 1962, where Henry finishes him off. And you see Erskine knocked out. He's forming a triangle. It's just, you know, crazy knockout, man. And it's one of them fight real, fight real classics, you know, in British boxing. The way Henry finished it, and you see Joe Erskine just laying there in a triangle shape, man. You know, Henry was a bit useful in his day. You know, defends against Dick Richardson, beats him in 5, KOs him in 5, beats Brian London again. Brian London, he's a roughhouse fighter. And Henry outpoints him again. He TKOs Johnny Prescott in 10. Henry TKOs Jack Bodell in 2. Jack was a tough old boy, you know. He wouldn't give up. Henry also TKO'd Billy Walker in 6. And he might have retired then. Henry. Jack Bodell comes back, takes the title from Carl Gizzy. Never heard of Carl Gizzy. That's in 1969 on points. Jack Bodell was awkward to fight. Very awkward guy to fight. He had an awkward style. He looked easy to beat, but he was awkward, man. And Henry Cooper comes back and takes the title from off Jack Bodell over 15 rounds. Just too classy, more than likely. Never seen the fight. And then we have the controversial one of the most controversial British heavyweight title fights. Joe Bugner versus Henry Cooper. 3 titles at stake. The British title, the Commonwealth title, and the European title. Harry Gibbs is the referee. It's at the Empire Pool at Wembley in London. And Joe Bugner wins a controversial 15-round decision. And what you have to realise is back then, only the referee scored in British title fights. So Harry Gibbs gave the fight to Joe Bugner, and it caused a stir in the arena. The crowd went crazy. The press went crazy. Joe Bugner got ostracised by the whole of the UK. They made his life hell. Henry Cooper never forgave Harry Gibbs. He never forgave Joe Bugner, and he promptly retired after that. Bugner, he went on to fight the likes of Ali twice and went the distance with Ali. He gave Joe Frazier a decent scrap in Earl's Court in London. And he was a durable big heavyweight, you know. Bugner on an uninspired day, and he had many of them, unfortunately for Joe. He loses his title against Jack Bodell. He shouldn't have really lost against Jack Bodell. I remember seeing the fight. Jack Bodell actually floors Bugner for a brief count, and he beats Joe. Shouldn't have happened, but when I say it shouldn't have happened, it did happen. Danny McLinden, I remember seeing that fight, but I've watched all these fights, you know. Danny McLinden, he came out swinging mad, and he hit Jack with some big shots, so some wild swings. He went for it, man. And like, the British Championship was in a bit of a transition here, you know. There was some earnest, honest, hard-trying fighters, but they weren't the most equipped for the job. Let's just say that. You know, Danny McLinden being one of them, and you could put Jack Bodell in there. Bunny Johnson, he takes the title from Danny McLinden. Bunny Johnson comes from Bacayard, Jamaica. He fought Tony Mundine, Anthony Mundine's dad in Australia. He beat guys like Mike Quarry, Jerry Quarry's brother. He actually fought Dennis Andrews for the light heavyweight title too, you know. So he actually moved down from heavyweight to light heavyweight. Wow, he beat Dennis Andrews on points, man. Dennis Andrews, you know, good fighter, man. Dennis Andrews lost his world title to Tommy Hearns back in the day. Dennis Andrews beat top contenders like Bobby Cheers. Dennis Andrews is a former world champion, beating Jeff Harding. 2-time world champion, isn't Dennis? Who else did he beat? J.B. Williamson. He's a good fighter. Okay. So Bunny Johnson wasn't no joke. Beat Dennis Andrews twice. Beat him on points too. He lost to the likes of John Conte. A light heavyweight. He looks like he was a really decent light heavyweight too. Wow. Lost to Dwayne Bobick by KO. Dwayne Bobick. Isn't he the guy who beat Larry Holmes as an amateur? And that's what made everybody say that Holmes weren't going to make it. Holmes quit against Dwayne Bobick. Yeah. And so, anyway, let's get over that hump there. I get a bit historical, a bit nostalgic sometimes, you know. But that's how I'm going to do the videos. He takes on Richard Dunn, loses against Richard Dunn, 15-round decision. Richard Dunn, with a bit of a character. I like Richard Dunn. I like Richard Dunn. Yeah, he was a nice guy. Richard Dunn got a title shot against Ali. Big guy. The fight took place in Germany. Ali TKO'd him in 5. So Richard Dunn goes on after beating Bunny Johnson. He defeats Danny McClendon, 2nd round KO. And then he takes on Ali, obviously, and gets TKO'd in 5. He's floored a whole load of times, but he didn't disgrace himself. You know, he tried his hardest. No one expected him to win. He made some money, and that was that. He loses the title to Joe Bugner in 1 round. Now, Joe was inspired on this day. He was definitely inspired, and he flattens Richard Dunn. Now, Bugner doesn't defend his title. He lost his next fight to Ron Lau, split decision. Split decision. Tough fight, though. Tough fight. I sat down and watched it on YouTube. Then we have John L. Gardner. John L. Gardner. He takes on Billy Aird for what must obviously be the vacant title, and TKO's Billy in 5. He goes on to take on Paul Sykes. Paul Sykes is a character. And what I'm putting in the description box is a series about his life and his trials as a fighter, and, you know, and most of you are going to like it. You're going to like it. It's in a few parts, but, you know, bear with it and watch it. Paul Sykes. Yeah, John L. Gardner takes on Paul Sykes. He TKOs him in 6. Sykes was thought to be a bit of a puncher. He could punch, but a few people thought he was going to turn over Gardner, but he wasn't able to do it. John L. Gardner, I'm going to imagine he vacates the title. In his next fight after Paul Sykes, he loses on points to Jimmy Young in the Empire Pool, Wembley. I must try and get hold of that fight and see that, man. I'd like to see that. You see? He went in as a British champion, right? And he was fighting one of the top contenders of the day, Jimmy Young. Jimmy Young. And he's just a standard 10-rounder. No title belt to try and sell the fight. And that's how boxing used to be back then. You know? Put a belt to everything, man. So I don't know what happened to his British title, but he lost his next fight to Jimmy Young. He was still European champion. Now, I left on very young. And where I was staying, there was a lot of boxing being watched. You know, that's where I picked up the majority of the bug I have today. And I remember they had that on video. We had John L. Gardner versus Dynamite Dokes. Oh my God. It was in America, in the Joe Louis Arena. 4th round KO. Reg Guttridge was commentating, and Dokes done a destruction job on my guy, man. I remember the last, was it a right hook? Bang, man, knocked his gum shield out of his mouth and just laid him out cold, man. That was just, wow. I was just like, crazy. Crazy. Michael Dokes, ring legend, you know, former WBA heavyweight champion too. Then we had Gordon Ferris beating Billy Aird for the title over 15 rounds. Ferris got knocked out by Neville Mead. Neville Mead, I think, was a Jamaican fighter or West Indian, from West Indian heritage, who looked a lot older than what he was, balding and stuff, you know. He KOs Gordon Ferris in a round. Mead was knocked out by David Pearce, a Welsh fighter, short squat fighter. David Pearce KO'd Neville Mead in 9, or TKO'd him in 9. I remember watching that one. Big shot by David Pearce, stops the fight, you know. But both men are since deceased. He seems shorter than 6 foot David Pearce, but you know. David Pearce actually went on to fight Lucian Rodriguez for the European title. And I remember him getting outclassed. I remember watching the fight. But I don't remember him flooring him twice. But he might actually have done, because Pearce was a puncher. You see, you do forget a lot of things, you know, over the years. But he actually had Rodriguez down twice. But I do remember him getting outpointed thoroughly. I do remember that. David Pearce. Once again, the British title is on ice for 2 years nearly. For nearly 2 years. Nearly 2 years to the day. 4 days short of 2 years. Why? I can't... And you see, I was actually watching boxing these days. I'm trying to work it out. Why? I'm trying to work this out. Why? The vacant title was contested between Roy Curry and Funzo Banjo. Just around the corner from where I live, in the Alexandra Pavilion. And I watched this fight, a midweek sports special. Funzo Banjo, big dude. And he could punch a bit. But sometimes he was a reluctant warrior. And on this night, he was a reluctant warrior. And what was supposed to be the night of his life, you know, he's getting a title shot, big opportunity. He just didn't seize the moment. Roy Curry was at least trying to force the action. I remember the fight very well. And Roy Curry won by maybe half a point, I think it was. Horace Notice, he takes the title from Roy Curry in Roy's first defense. I remember seeing that fight. Horace Notice, Jamaican-born. A lot of Jamaican-born fighters back in the UK. I wonder what's happened to that, you know. I think Roy Curry was born in Jamaica too. He could have well have been born in Jamaica too. And he stopped Curry while he was still on his feet. I remember that fight there. Good win. Took the title. He defended against Dave Garside from the northeast of the country. TKO in 5. He beat Paul Lister in the northeast. I only got to see that fight last week. Kind of this fight has prompted me to do this video, going over some British heavyweight title fights. I saw this fight last week because this wasn't covered in London. It was on a central area broadcasted program, so we didn't get to see it in London. Why they used to do things like that, I don't know. You know, infuriating. Show the whole of the country the British title fight. Show the fucking whole of the country. Right? So he beats Paul Lister in 3, and we had Gary Newburn, the post-fight interviewer, doing his usual I want to kill you Gary Newburn thing, making you want to kill him. Man, boxing was quite big in the northeast them days, you know. They had a lot of heavyweights actually, because I'm talking about Paul Lister there and Dave Garside. They had Manny Burgo and Big John Westgarth. Can't forget Glenn McCrory as well from the northeast. He started as a heavyweight. Roy Curry, who I was just speaking about previously. I never forget that time, man. It was Roy Curry versus Glenn McCrory. And everybody assumed that McCrory was going to win, man. You probably know Glenn McCrory from watching him on Sky Sports. He's a commentator, former cruiserweight champion, IBF cruiserweight champion. He fought Roy Curry, man, and in second round, they only showed the second round, and Curry threw this left hook, man, into McCrory's head and just sparked him out, man. I'll never forget that, boy. Like, whoa, damn. And he promptly moved down to cruiserweight after that. I'm sure he did. I'm sure after the Roy Curry fight, he moved down to cruiserweight, boy. That was that. That was that right there. So let's get back to Horace Notice. He has the rematch with Roy Curry. I remember that fight. He TKOs Roy in 10, but this fight is a lot tougher. I remember Roy throwing some body shots on Horace that really tested him, you know, but Horace stood up to the job. Unfortunately for Horace, a detached retina stopped him from competing. Gary Mason took up the slack, who was Horace's stablemate. Horace Notice, Gary Mason, and Frank Bruno were all in the Terry Lawless stable. So they never fought each other, unfortunately. Frank Bruno, believe it or not, as popular as Frank Bruno is, could be actually the most popular British fighter that I have ever witnessed in all the time I've been watching boxing. Could well be one of the most popular sportsmen to come out of this country. Frank Bruno has never fought for a British title. Check that out. Never. And Terry Lawless should never have let that happen. or whoever was managing Bruno should have never have let that happen. Bruno should have at least had one British title fight. He should have at least had one before he retired. He won the European title and the WBC World Championship, but never, ever competed for the British title. Now, don't get me wrong, he would have more than likely won it if he had competed for it. But all the same, you know, Lennox Lewis won the title. I mean, he took it off Gary Mason. He took it off Gary Mason because after Gary Mason defeats Hugh Curry, knocks him out in 4, he takes on Jess Harding. Now, this fight here is scary. Jess Harding is a promoter now. He's a promoter, you know. Or at least he was until Spencer Oliver got injured really badly. Now, Jess Harding challenging for Gary Mason's title in Brentwood, Essex. All I remember, see, it's all in my head. Jess Harding, if I remember, is a southpaw. Yeah? And he comes out nice. He comes out nice, you know. Mason wasn't having really problems, but the southpaw stance was working quite nice. He was getting in a few leads and getting out. He looked pretty good, Jess Harding. Started the fight. And it looked like, was it Terry Lawless in the corner? I can't remember who was in the corner. I don't know if Terry Lawless was still in the corner at that stage. He probably was. But I remember that, you know, they had a word in Mason's ear. Mason came out serious in the second round. And Harding, buoyed on by his first round success, was getting confident. And so you should. You have to start, you know, building into the fight, get more confident, so you can build up a momentum. Mason caught Harding with some blockbuster shots. I remember one left hook put Harding into the ropes. I think there might have been a follow-up combination. He goes down. He gets back up. Obviously hurt. Obviously hurt. And Mason follows up, man, with a combination. And Harding was just sparked out on the floor. Devastating KO. Gary Mason, boy. Gary Mason, R.I.P. He died the other day while riding his mountain bike or whatever and got hit by a big vehicle and died. That's quite sad. Mason, once again, Jamaican born. Gary Mason, Jamaican born. Look at all our black fighters, black Jamaican born fighters. That's what I remember, but I used to like the 80s and the 90s a lot, man, you know? What's happened to that shit? Now, a lot of people don't talk about Gary Mason, right? 37 fights, 34 KOs, 1 defeat to Lennox Lewis. His career was over after the Lennox Lewis loss. Detached retinas, I think, after the Lewis fight, you know. He had a couple of easy KO wins in America after that, you know, but it was over by then, and, you know, the eye damage just signaled the end of his career. And Mason could punch, and he could take a good punch too, yeah? He was the first guy to give Lennox a test. First guy. He lost by a 7th round TKO. He wasn't really hurt by getting chinned or wobbled or anything like that. Lennox fought behind the jab, fought well as well. Swole up Gary's eyes pretty badly, and the fight was stopped. Now, there was a stage in that fight. I was watching that fight with my sister's boyfriend, and we both saw Lewis's legs go. It was hard to tell what punch made Lennox's legs go, but I mean, it went a little Bambi-ish. His legs went a little Bambi-ish on him, you know? And Gary Mason was a good fighter. Was a very good fighter. Bit slow at times, but very powerful, strong guy. Who knows what he could have done? So Lennox Lewis, he knocks out Glenn McCrory, who most of you might know these days as a Sky commentator. Glenn was also former IBF Cruiserweight champion, who was embarking on a comeback at heavyweight when Lennox stopped him. And I remember this fight because, you know, I had my girl in the room trying to watch the boxing. So, okay, I put the VCR on and recorded it. But I still wanted to watch it live when it was happening, you know what I mean? And like, you know, women starts going, oh, you've got it recorded, you watch it later, I'm here for the... Okay. So that was that. And Lennox knocked out McCrory in 2. destroyed him. He destroys Dereck Williams. Dereck Williams, man. He was a Commonwealth champion, Dereck Williams. And he didn't have much amateur experience. Big guy. And on his day, he could fight. He actually could fight. I remember when he knocked out Jimmy Thunder from Australia in about a round. He just polished him off quick, man. And Thunder was good. But he was just a weird fighter. I remember when he fought that guy, the French gypsy guy, the small guy for the European title. And everyone thought, oh, he's just going to go over there and take the European title. Gene something. And this guy beat him twice. How did he let this guy beat him twice? How? We was horrified in the British boxing scene. How that happened? And Lennox went and took the guy's title. Took his European title. Gene Chanay, his name was. You know what I mean? No boxer, Gene Chanay. How Dereck Williams let this guy beat him twice, I don't know. The guy just swarmed him and... I remember Williams saying that they drugged him or poisoned his food in the first fight. But he lost the second fight as well. So I don't know if they managed to get him twice, but I'm going to assume they took their own food the next time if it was food poisoning. But it is what it is. Dereck's a nice guy, though. So Lennox, his last British title fight was against Dereck Williams. Then we have the reign of Herbie Hyde. Well, not so much the reign. Herbie knocked out Michael Murray, a Manchester-based heavyweight. He actually knocked out Kevin McBride, Michael Murray, as far as I can remember back in the day. Herbie, two-time WBO champion, didn't defend the title for any period of time. Let's see what Herbie went on to do. Yeah, I remember him beating Conroy Nelson. He also TKO'd Gene Morris Chanay, something that Dereck Williams couldn't do. Yeah, he didn't really bother with the British title. You know, he chose to fight for the WBC international titles and stuff like that. And then he got a shot against Michael Bent and TKO'd him in 7 and actually hurt Michael pretty bad. Michael had swellings on his brain, as I remember, but they managed to catch it early. British boxing was in a transition period after Michael Watson, and they was very cautious and very meticulous in making sure they had the right medical equipment for incidents like these. And Michael Bent, today, that was his last fight. He was just coming off the win against Tommy Morrison, who he floored 3 times in an upset win for the WBO title. Michael Bent today is cerebral. He's fluid, no impaired speech or slurring, in good shape. And I'm glad for that. I actually heard Michael Bent talking on the BBC the other month about a lot of his demons and stuff that he had to go through outside the ring. It was very interesting, you know, stuff that I didn't know about. But let's move on. Herbie Hyde was preceded by James Oyabola, who was shot just the other year by somebody in a club who, you can see why they shot James. James is about 6'7", so you know, he wasn't going to get in no confrontation with James, you know what I mean? A big dude. And James knocked out Clifton Mitchell, who... What is Clifton Mitchell doing in boxing these days? Who do I see him? Do I see him with Kell Brook? I just see him in some capacity. He's either... I think he's a trainer. Clifton Mitchell, who they used to call Paddy Riley. He's from Sheffield, Clifton Mitchell. Big black guy, and, you know, Brendan Ingle decided to nickname him Paddy Riley. That was his nickname, anyway. And... he was a decent boxer. The fight took place in Cardiff, which is in Wales. I remember watching this. Mitchell was winning the fight relatively easy, outboxing Oyabola, a former ABA champion, tall guy, who most of us thought wasn't going to become a British champion at least. He looked a bit too awkward at stages of his career to become a British champion. But Mitchell was winning the fight relatively easy, but he made the cardinal sin against a tall fighter. He moved back in a straight line. Upright in a straight line. Oyabola just followed his movement and threw a right hand, a straight right. It landed and out went Clifton Mitchell, and Oyabola became British champion. Oyabola Lost in his first title defence against Scott Welsh. I forgot all about that. Oyebola actually knocked him out in America a few years previously before that, or a year before that. And Scott Welsh was actually winning the fight as far as I remember. And Oyebola managed to lay him out with one punch. So Scott Welsh got his revenge. He probably vacated to fight Joe Bugner in what would have been a decent money fight. I remember him stopping Bugner in 6. I think he might have broke one of Bugner's ribs or something like that. And he went on to fight for the WBO title, which another Brit held, who was Henry Akinwande. Basketball-looking type boxer who contracted hepatitis. Akinwande also fought Lennox Lewis for the WBC heavyweight title and got disqualified for holding on too much. But he did, he troubled Lennox with one shot. It looked like Lennox, did he go down? I think one shot did trouble Lennox from Akinwande. I'm going to stand by that, Lennox. I'm sorry. One shot did get through. But for the most part, he did shit all in that fight. Julius Francis TKO'd Gary Delaney for the vacant title, which Scott Welsh left vacant. Gary Delaney is actually in jail, I think, for murder. He murdered someone. And he used to date that topless model. Can't remember her name. She does bodybuilding now. And she was talking about how he used to beat her up and practically turn her into a lesbian. I'm not laughing at that, but you know what I mean, it's life. Julius Francis, who fought Mike Tyson and had the soles of his feet advertised by the Sun newspaper. They actually paid him for that because they knew that Tyson was going to land a bomb on him at some stage, you know. And considering that he went down about 5 or 6 times, they also got some good shots of the soles. Yeah. Julius went on to defend against Pele Reed. Now, Pele Reed was a dude. Oh, man. Pele Reed. Looks can be so deceptive. Okay, let's tell you about Pele Reed. What happened to Pele Reed? What was it? What happened exactly? Now, Pele Reed, I think he was a Brendan Ingle fighter. You know, the Brendan Ingle stable, the hands down style, Nassim Hamed, Harold Graham, etc., etc. Starts off like a whirlwind. Looking really good. Looking really good. You know, knocks out Michael Murray in a round, former British champion. Didn't have no great names on there, but he had some solid journeymen who he was just flattening. I remember when he KO'd Wayne Llewellyn in 1 round. British title eliminator. And Llewellyn was okay, you know, it's supposed to be a stiff fight. And he just destroyed Llewellyn. And at that stage there, I thought this guy is going to go on to at least challenge for top honours. He has one more fight. Then he takes on Julius Francis, and it all went wrong. It all went wrong. He got TKO'd in 3. Even Orlin Norris, light punching Orlin Norris, knocked him out in 1 round. How the fuck did that happen? This guy was hard to hit, good footwork, hard puncher. Julius Francis ruined this guy's career. Even Jack Lord Jacobs beat him. I couldn't believe when Jack Lord Jacobs beat him that night. That was the beginning of the end. Pele Reed actually knocked out Vitaly Klitschko in a kickboxing match. But I digress. Julius Francis had an Indian summer in 1999. That's what he had. He had an Indian summer. He took the unbeaten record of Pele Reed, and then he took on Danny Williams. Williams was unbeaten, pure knockouts. People in America were talking highly of Danny Williams, right? And I never saw the fight. They might have televised it on Sky, but I didn't get to see it. I read about it in the boxing news, though. Julius Francis, I'm going to actually track that fight down tonight. Julius Francis outpointed Danny Williams over 12 rounds. Now, it doesn't mean nothing to you guys over there, but you don't live in the UK. This was a big shock for the British boxing fraternity. Big shock. He outpointed Danny. And then Julius went on to avenge an earlier loss to Scott Welsh by outpointing him. All for the British title. And somehow he managed to lose the title against Mike Holden. How that happened, I don't know. I don't know what happened to Mike Holden. Let's box rec what happened to him if we can have an indication by what happened in his career. I don't, he must have vacated the title. He must have vacated it. Because in his next fight, he fights Julius Francis again. And he loses for the Intercontinental Heavyweight title for the WBO. He loses that on points to Julius Francis. So Francis avenges his previous loss to Mike Holden. I don't know what happened to Mike Holden and why he didn't hold on to the title. But nevertheless, Danny Williams takes on Mark Potter for the vacant British title. Now, this is one of the most bizarre fights to take place over these shores. Williams is in the driving seat at the start of the fight. I do remember his shoulder coming out of joint. It was horrible. Mark Potter obviously now is pressing the action. Williams is fighting with one arm. They let him come out for round 6. And he's been fighting with his arm for a couple of rounds now. Or a round or so. You know, like, the commentators are saying they're going to have to stop the fight. And this and that. I mean, Danny lands a left hook. Floors Potter. Potter's hurt badly. Gets back up. Danny follows up with his one arm. And TKO's Mark Potter. Amazing fight. With a dislocated shoulder. Amazing. In a rematch, Danny avenges the loss to Julius Francis. This time he TKOs him in 4. I remember him busting up Julius's eye. That's what I remember. And the fight being stopped. Then he had a series of fights with Michael Sprott in the early part of 2000. I'll never forget that, man. I'll never forget that. Danny wins the first fight. Danny defends against Keith Long. I can't remember that fight. I think Keith Long was a black heavyweight. I can't remember much about that. And then he TKOs Michael Sprott again. I think it's the third fight. Was it the third fight where he hit Michael with what looked like a cheap shot and took him out? No, it was the second fight. The second fight. Michael Sprott was winning the fight. I can't remember what happened. I think it was on the break. Danny Williams hit him and he TKO'd him and the referee allowed the result to stand. I do remember that. And then Michael Sprott finally got his win over Danny Williams in the third fight. Finally. Sprott was beaten by Matt Skelton in his first defense. Matt was just way too strong. Just outstrengthed Michael. And it was a tough fight. It was a tough fight. And the referee stopped it in the last round. Skelton stopped Mark Krentz, a tall but smallish heavyweight nevertheless. I remember Krentz losing to Audley Harrison, but giving Harrison a tough fight. Matt Skelton, he TKO'd John McDermott in a round, which shocked me and shocked a lot of people at the time. McDermott is not nothing special, but he's tough, and we didn't expect that. He knocked him out in a round. And he went on to fight for a portion of the world title in Matt Skelton. He fought, what's the white Tyson in Europe called? Ruslan Shagayev. That's the guy. Ruslan Shagayev. Cool. And then we had Scott Gamma from Wales. Took the vacant title. Smallish heavyweight. He beat Mark Krentz by TKO. And he fought Mickey Steeds, who's still fighting today, actually. And then Danny Williams came back. I think he was retired after, or his career was sort of like at a crossroads period after Klitschko beat him. He came back, lost a lot of weight, and then he stopped Scott Gamma in 9 rounds, took the title. He beat John McDermott twice. One of them I remember being very controversial, or maybe both of them were actually. I can't remember too much about them fights, to be honest with you. Dereck Chisora took the title from Danny Williams. Second round KO. Dereck defended against Sam Sexton. 9th round KO for Dereck against Sam. Tyson Fury on a Channel 5 broadcast. He took the titles from Dereck via unanimous decision over 12. Good fight. And they're planning to have a rematch. Tyson Fury, rather than fight David Price at the time, vacated the title, opted to fight for the Irish title. I don't know why you do no disrespect to the Irish people out there, but it's not a good substitution. And you guys know that too. You know, David Price took the vacant title from Sam Sexton in Farr. And he's still fighting. You know, who knows? He might be able to make amends and do something. But we've seen how he's been derailed by Anthony Thompson twice. And I think he still holds the British belt, actually. I think he still holds it. The last time he defended it was against Matt Skelton, who he knocked out in 2. And obviously defended against Audley Harrison before that in 1. The Audley Harrison fight was a farce. And that's weird, actually. The British heavyweight title has been out of commission for about a year and 4 months. So I don't know what's happening with it right now. But that's the story so far. Maybe Anthony Joshua will take it up next. Who knows? Peace.